Hello, my beautiful people. We are going to continue on with chapter 8 in the book of Genesis. If you see me look left and right, I've got my notes, I got my Bible. Please excuse my TV, I forgot to shut it off. And let's go ahead and get started. So, chapter 8 is about Noah and his family leaving the ark. And it's not a very long chapter, but it's a good chapter. So let's go ahead and continue on. So we're going to the first section is God remembers Noah. Excuse me, get the hiccups now. Through everything. And he didn't forget him. And verse 1 talks about how God focuses his attention to Noah again. And verse 1 says, "And God remembered Noah and every living thing and all the cattle that was with him in the ark. And God made a wind to pass over the earth, and the waters assuaged." Assuaged means withhold, restrained, or held back, basically. So when it says God remembered Noah, so this is a non-literal picture of God in human terms we can understand. Okay? Let me read that again. When it says God remembered Noah, this is not a non-literal picture of God in human terms we can understand. And God never forgot Noah, sustaining him in every day on the ark. But at this point, God again turned his active attention toward Noah. And when God made a wind, God knew how to make the waters subside. And that's what he did when he made up a wind. Verses 2 through 5 talks about the flood waters receding, and the ark rests on the mountains of Ararat. And so 2 through 5 says, "The fountains also of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. And the waters returned off from the earth continuously. And after the end of the 150 days, the waters were abated. And the ark rested in the 7th month on the 17th day of the month upon the mountains of Ararat. And the waters decreased continually until the 10th month. In the 10th month, on the first day of the month, were the tops of the mountains seen." So in verse 2, the rain was now stopped, and God was in control of everything. Remember, the ark didn't have a sail. It only floated. So God was in full control over everything on this earth when that happened. In verse 4, when at the end it says, "upon the mountains of Ararat." So possibly thinking that mountain was not a good place to leave the ark at that high altitude and terrain, because that meant for difficult departure for everyone and everything. However, it was God's purpose to put it in a place where it would be preserved for thousands of years. That is why he put it there. God knew what he was doing, and we have to trust God with that. And they were in total trust with him, because they didn't have nothing else to do but trust in the Lord. And in verse 5, where it says the tops of the mountains were seen, this is another indication in the Bible that this was a worldwide flood. It was so significant that for a time, the tops of the mountains were covered. And now they were seen again as the waters decreased. So this is a right here is another explanation and a good indication that there was a worldwide flood, and there was, because God said there was. So, but can you imagine how much water that had to have been? Oh, it just blows my mind every time. Every time. All right, on to 6 through 12, verse 6 through 12. And this talks about the birds are used to test the condition of the earth. And verse 6 says, "And it came to pass at the end of 40 days that Noah opened the window of the ark which he had made. And he sent forth a raven, which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. Also he sent forth a dove from him to see if the waters were abated from off the face of the ground. But the dove found no rest for the sole of her foot, and she returned unto him into the ark. For the waters were on the face of the whole earth. Then he put forth his hand, and took her, and pulled her in unto him unto the ark. And he stayed yet another 7 days, and again he sent forth the dove out of the ark. And the dove came in to him in the evening, and lo, in her mouth was an olive leaf plucked off. So Noah knew that there was that the waters were abated from off the earth. And he stayed yet another 7 days, and sent forth the dove, which returned not again unto him any more." So at the end of 40 days, this was counted from the time when the rain began. God told Noah when to get into the ark, but not for how long. And Noah opened the window in Genesis chapter 6, verse 16, describes the window that was made in the upper portion of the ark. So the window also had a covering, that would open and close. So in verse 16 of chapter 6, it talks about the making of the window. And now in chapter 7, it talks about the window and him going to the window and the birds coming in and out. He sent a raven in verse 6. Apparently, the raven did not return to the ark. I'm sorry. 7. Okay, yeah. Sorry, I had to reread that because I got a little confused. And he sent forth a raven, which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up from off the earth. So basically, when the raven did not return to the ark, back and forth. Well, it says he went back and forth. A raven is a scavenger, and he may have not came back to the ark, because with him being the raven being a scavenger, and this is my assumption on this one. This is another little kind of tricky one for me. Because a raven is a scavenger, he might have rested and fed upon the dead that were floating carcasses. But it says, which went forth to and fro until the waters were dried up off the earth. So it says to and fro. So he went to and fro. He was back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So what was he doing? Was he eating off the dead? Which I'm assuming that's could be what happened. But in verse 7, that's my interpretation of it. You guys may have a different interpretation of it. Verse 9, the dove found no resting place and returned to the ark. So a dove being a clean, non-scavenging bird, the dove would not land until there was a dry, suitable place to land, which is why he sent out the dove. And then in verse 11, a dove came back, a plucked olive leaf in her mouth, and me and this fly is about to go at it. So the raven never returned, but the dove did, with evidence of dry land. And Noah knew the season of judgment was over, and God began to renew plant life on the earth. Since this, a dove with an olive branch and leaf has been a symbol of peace and goodness. So there's a symbol now out or has been out. I'm sorry, has been out. I'm sure you've seen it. So the symbol with the dove with an olive branch and a leaf. It's all over the place. The symbol has been forever. It is a symbol of peace and goodness, and this is where it pertains from. Okay, so verse 13 through 19. And this talks about Noah and the family and animals all leaving the ark. So verse 13 through 19. And it came to pass in the 601st year, in the first month, the first day of the month, the waters were dried up from all the earth, and Noah removed the covering of the ark and looked, and behold, the face of the ground was dry. And in the second month, on the 7th and 20th day of the month, was the earth dried. And God spoke unto Noah, saying, Go forth of the ark, thou and thy wife, and thy sons' wives with thee. Bring forth with thee every living thing that is with thee of all flesh, both the fowl and of cattle, and of every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, that they may breed abundantly in the earth, and be fruitful, and multiply upon the earth. And Noah went forth, and his sons and wives, and his sons' wives with him. Every beast, every creeping thing, and every fowl, and whatsoever creepeth upon the earth, after their kinds, went forth out of the ark. And so in verse 13, when it says, in the 601st year. So you can also reference that to Genesis chapter 7, verse 11 through 13. It says that Noah entered the ark on the 17th day of the second month of the 600th year of his life. Okay. This is almost a full year later. And in the second month of his 601st year, Noah left the ark. Can you imagine being almost a year? Okay. In verse 17, where it says, bring out with you every living thing. So everything that was loaded onto the ark was unloaded. So that means that the ark would have been empty. In verse 20, this talks about how God's covenant with Noah, and Noah builds an altar and offers a sacrifice. So in verse 20 it says, and Noah builded an altar unto the Lord, and took of every clean beast and of every clean fowl, and offered burnt offerings on the altar. Now, Noah built an altar. Noah's first act after leaving the ark was to worship God through sacrifice. And took every clean animal and every clean bird. So this was a costly offering, unto God. But it pleased God. It's also referenced in Romans chapter 12, verse 1, Philippians chapter 4, verse 18, and Hebrews chapter 13, verse 15. Also, costly sacrifices pleases God, not because he is greedy, but because God himself sacrificed at great cost. God wants this from us because it shows we are being conformed into the image of Jesus. As Paul wrote in Ephesians chapter 5, verse 2, we should be like Jesus in this regard. Also, may we think like David, which you can reference that in 2 Samuel chapter 24, verse 24. And me and this fly is about ready to go at it. Now, my question that I still don't understand is in the verse we just talked about. This one I had a little bit of hard time on, because what about there only being two of everything? If two left the ark, if there's only two on the ark, did they, his first act was he made an altar, right? But if there was only two of everything, then my question is, where did the sacrifices come from? Did time lapse? Did it take a while to do the altar? But that was his first act. So, if you guys know, please comment, let me know, because I'm really curious about that one. All right, verse 21 and 22, last two verses of chapter 8. And this is God's promise to Noah and all mankind. So 21 and 22 says, "And the Lord smelled a sweet savor. And the Lord said in his heart, I will not again curse the ground any more for man's sake. For the imagination of men's hearts is evil from his youth. Neither will I again smite any more every living thing as I have done. While the earth remains, seed time and harvest, and cold and heat, and summer and winter, and day and night shall not cease." Until judgment, of course. So the Lord smelled a sweet aroma. So he then made a promise to Noah after he smelled the sweet aroma. And it was more pleasing to God than the smell was the heart of Noah in his sacrifice. And God promised to never flood the world again or to destroy every living thing. This was a promise full of mercy. He gave us mercy. And cold, heat, winter, and summer, God promises that after the flood, the earth would have established seasons. So we now have seasons: winter, summer, spring, and fall, until Judgment Day. All right. Well, that ends chapter 8. Like I said, that was a kind of a short chapter, but a lot of good information. All right. So now we are going on to, in the next video, we will continue on with chapter 9. Bye, guys.